Junior high, 6th to 8th grade, you guys are dismissed. Had an announcement we're going to do here at the beginning, but we'll save it for the end. It's on Financial Peace University. Real quick, we didn't get bulletins today, and I'm just sharing with you that's my fault. Our admin and my wife were both at the women's retreat, and they, I was given the task of picking up the bulletins. My goodness, I don't know how my wife does it, because she does. Because taking care of the kids and everything else that I thought I was doing. We have no bulletins today. Anyway, glad you guys are here. We're jumping into this new series. My name is Phil. I get the privilege of being the campus pastor here at Salisbury Park and the lead pastor of Lakeview Church. David, you fill up. Oh, sorry. And we're jumping back into the third part of this 5-week series called Fall 5 Times Stand Up 6. And it's an interesting series where we're looking at common trials and ways people experience what we go through, some of the difficulty, some of the victories, some of the losses. We've covered doubts and abandonment. Today we're looking at anger, and then we'll carry on with pain and arrogance, or in other words, arrogance is self-righteousness. That's what we'll be looking at. We're highlighting different characters in the Bible, some of their victories, some of their losses. We're hopefully learning from them. Where they do really well, we can learn to react like they do. Where they do poorly, we can learn to say, I'd rather not do that. And in this, it's interesting for us that regardless of what they do, we see God being consistent. We see God who is faithful, God who is loving, God who is always willing to welcome us back no matter how far we fall. And in today's story, we're going to see a guy who falls and just keeps falling. It's actually funny. The first week, I did a character named Gideon who, at the end, he falls and didn't get back up. And then we let Jason speak, and he gets to do Hannah last week, and she gets back up. And today, it's me again, and somebody who's staying down on their face again. So we're looking at these different characters, and something to point out, in the Old Testament, these are people who were pre-Jesus' death on the cross, and they had a different interaction with God than we do. There's things that we'll say here, like it's okay not to be okay, or Jesus died for that too. And these are all hinged around what Jesus did on the cross. In the Old Testament, they had just a different experience. So as we're looking into this, keep that in mind. Before we go any further, there's a verse that we're sharing at the beginning and at the end of every one of these messages through this series to help us understand, as we're thinking about anger, and everybody's going to have a reaction to anger in this moment as I say it, let's start with this verse. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. And perseverance is such a fantastic word. So in moments of anger and stubbornness in myself, and somebody might call it out, I say, I'm not angry, I'm persevering. And it's a little flip that I do. I'm going to encourage you not to take that as your take-home for today. It's not the proper way to do it. But we're looking at a guy today, his name is Saul, and it's not Paul of the New Testament who planted all the churches, and whose name was Saul and changed to Paul. But we're actually looking at Saul, who lived 1,000 years earlier, and he was the first king of the nation of Israel. He reigned right around 1030 BC, and spoiler alert, Saul had major anger issues, right? Saul really struggled with that, and this is the fall down that we're going to be looking at today. Now, I do have to make a point of clarification, because when we think of anger, being angry doesn't make you a sinner, being a human makes you a sinner, right? Now, we all are angry at some point or time or another, but I want to point out that when it comes to anger, there's actually good anger and bad anger. Good anger I would call holy discontent. You are angry about the things that go against God and the things that go against injustices against people and the innocent, right? We can be angry about those things. The widow and the orphan in those situations. We can be angry about injustices that we hear about. We can be angry in those. The difference between that anger, a holy discontent, and a self-indulgent reactionary anger is the outcome. What people experience from our anger. When our anger comes out and it pushes people away from Jesus, that's not good anger. Let me say that straight up. So that's the kind of anger we're going to be looking at today, is the anger that hurts people while hurting ourselves. So make sure that we understand that. And I think all of us would like to believe that we don't struggle with anger, right? I would hope that we're we're trying not to, but I would say it's just not the case. We all struggle with this. And you might be like the calmest person in the room, and you're like, I don't get angry. I promise you, if you follow me on this, we all do. Okay? Anger at our failures, where we don't meet our expectations, or our failure at other people's experiences that don't meet our expectations, or just situations that don't happen the way we want them to, right? The reality is that the frustration at the state of the world and the state of ourselves is constantly exploding out of us like little or big volcanoes, right? We have these anger moments, and you don't have to look too far to see it. Now, some of you may say, this is not my struggle, I'm not a person who reacts to anger. I already said that's not true. So let me give you a reason why. In fact, we all struggle with it, and it manifests in person to person differently, right? The obvious one is the Hulk anger, right? We know that person who just like, they freak out. They're the ones who, it's better for them to live in Canada, so they go punch a snow pile kind of thing, right? Those people, rather than here, just let them take the car. They very much visually see it. A friend of mine, he said, it's like I'm on a train track and I can't stop, I can't get off the train, just So that anger is real obvious. The other anger is like when we hit people with our intellect. Right? I'm smarter than you. I'm going to make you look dumb. Right? There's this anger piece because we're upset with who they are. Right? We mock others that hurt us. There's also this other one. This is a tricky one. It's the passive aggressive thing. I'm nice to you, but behind your back. Right? That's a form of anger. I'm going to get you. And then there's the other ones, and those of you who are in here, I'm calling you out, that you quietly plot revenge. We think it's good. We can't see it on the outside, but deep down you're just like, oh yeah. You just wait. Not today, not tomorrow. Soon. And we'll get you. Right? The point is anger affects all people. We just react a little bit differently. And it's anger that's been around for all time. People get angry and have been getting angry for millennia. And Saul was no exception. He struggled with anger. We're going to look at 3 different things with him today. 3 different points of his anger experiences, and we'll see what God does through it. First of all, first one we're going to look at, and I'm not telling you what they are because these are the points, so I'm giving you like the not points, but that way you're not writing. Oh, you can't write down the stuff anyways. You're not bold this. All right. Being placed first of all, he's placed in a difficult spot. That's the first story we're going to look at with Saul, is he's placed in a difficult place, different, challenging thing. The second is he's building an identity that becomes threatened, that becomes challenged. And the third one is falling into a place of insecurity and jealousy. These 3 stories we're going to look at, 3 different experiences that Saul has, and we're going to watch as he falls into them. We can relate to those particular things, even if we can't relate to the exact thing he's doing. So, first of all, this is where we pick it up. We have to look at the context here. Last week, Jason brought us to Hannah. Hannah was the mother of Samuel, who was the last judge of the nation of Israel, meaning kind of a military leader, and he became the first prophet of Israel, and he is the one who, the nation of Israel says, we want a king. God says, I'm your king. They say, no, we don't want God as our king. We want a human king. We want one who leads us. Samuel says, no, this is a bad idea. But they keep pushing it, and God said, all right, fine. Let him do their thing. He's going to fail. This guy's going to fail. And then we have Saul. Saul comes into the picture on that scene. So 1 Samuel 9:1-2 says this: there was a wealthy, influential man named Kish from the tribe of Benjamin. His son, Saul, was the most handsome man in Israel. Right? What a description. Head and shoulders taller than anyone else in the land. Now, if you haven't noticed, the pastors here at Lakeview, Jeff and myself, we're not tall. So whenever there's a tall reference, we're just like, yeah, whatever, I'm tuning out at this point, right? He doesn't fit in every single car like I do, which is kind of nice. I can sit in any back seat. So I wouldn't have problems. But as far as a measure of kingliness, being tall and handsome was a big deal to Israel. It stood head and shoulders above everybody. And unfortunately for Saul, this is like 90% of what he had going for him. He looked the part. Could he live the part? Could he be the part? That was the challenge for him to be a king. And Saul was lacking in a lot of personal characteristics. In fact, he wasn't a good leader or a good ruler. He just kind of looked good. Like, think of a 1980s bully. We got a picture for you here, a couple of them. Right? Aside from these particular pictures, they're good-looking guys, but They didn't have a lot going for them as far as character. Now, fast forward, when Saul's becoming king, he's identified as King Samuel, the last judge, the first prophet of Israel, warned the people about making this guy king. We don't need him. He told them how bad of a job the king is going to do, and he already told Saul that he will be that king. So Samuel's told Saul, like, you should be doing this. God is not for this. Like, this isn't good. Israel wants it. This is a spot you're doing. Have fun. Right? This is what Saul's walking into. Now, with all the tribes and all the people assembled, they've traveled from all over the place to be here. Samuel's still warning and rebuking them, saying, don't do this, don't do this. God is our king. We don't need a human king. And then we get to this verse. Finally, Saul, son of Kish, was chosen because they just ignored God and said, he was among them. But when they looked for him, he had disappeared. Where are you going? Because he just heard all this from Samuel. So you're not going to do well. So they asked the Lord, where is he? And the Lord replied, oh, one of the funniest pieces of scripture in the Bible right here. He's hiding among the baggage. Where's our future king? He's hiding. Oh, this is great. This is more who Saul is. He's from a wealthy family. He probably had servants. He probably didn't have any responsibility. He probably got to do whatever he wants. And now he's in this spot, and he's like, I don't want it. It sounds horrible. It's like work. It's responsibility and stuff. No thanks. But they found him and brought him out, and he stood head and shoulders above everyone else. What do we say? Oh, yeah, he's tall. Woo! Right? The thing is interesting. They never mention Saul wanting to be king. You know, he's being told to step into the role, a role that he's destined to fail. We already know that. And he's positioned in a place where he's in this status place that is already an offense to God. This is where his story starts off. So, as much as I like to pick on Saul, you're like, this kind of sucks. This kind of sucks. And when it comes to anger, it's a difficult thing. He's placed in a difficult place, and this is point number one. Sometimes anger can be the result of being in a position we never wanted. Right? Think of somebody, you know, if we want to relate it personally, somebody who is a cancer patient. You know, they didn't set out to say, this is totally my choice. This is a challenge I've always wanted. Right? That's not where we're at. I've never met someone who's also said, oh, I love difficult relationships. I want to be married to someone who's an absolute nightmare. Like, that's not a thing. And yet, in this case, we can go, I've been in that place where something happened to me where I was in a position I didn't want to be in. My response in some way is going to be anger, much like Saul's. Now, this is Saul's first story. This is his first experience. And now he's got to figure out what to do with it. Because even though he's put in this position, he's angry. Now, does he turn to God and say, all right, God, I'm with you. I don't really want to be here. I quit here, but I'm going to lean into you. Unfortunately, for Saul, he doesn't do that. He leans into himself. And we find ourselves in situations we don't want to be. We see he's in places he doesn't want to be. And there's a particular chapter in the Bible that's kind of fascinating. We're not going over it all today, but you can check it out. So if you can make a note, it's 1 Samuel chapter 11, but I'll summarize it for you. Okay, Saul is the king now, and there's this outlying little city, little town, and it gets attacked by a neighboring army. And the neighboring army says, hey, you know what, we'll let you live, but you got to pluck out your right eye. And the neighboring army is like, whoa, can we see if anybody will help us first? And they say, yeah, sure. Because they think Israel's weak and pathetic, so go ahead, do your thing. Well, this gets back to Saul, and Saul, you would think, all right, if he's following God like the judges before him, he would say, all right, God, what do you want me to do? Saul doesn't do that. He's like, I hate this. I'm still the stinking king. I'm handsome, I'm big, I'm kind of a big deal. All right, we're going to do this my way. This is what Saul does. So he cuts up an ox, and he sends the pieces to all the different people of the nation of Israel and said, all right, we're going to war, and you're coming right now, and if you don't, I'm going to cut up your ox, I'm going to cut up this one. Now get out of here and do what I say. That's how Saul starts his reign. Well, the end of the story is Saul takes the army out, and they destroy this attacking army, they protect the town, and all the people are like, yay, we want a new king, and look what he did. Now, what they're not seeing is God wasn't involved. Saul, out of his anger, threatens everybody and forces them underneath his leadership, which was what God's concern was from the beginning of them having a king, is because he would rule over them and force their children to go to war for him. Is exactly what's happening. But Israel doesn't see it that way. God's out of the picture, and then this is how they respond. 1 Samuel 11:12 says, then the people exclaimed to Samuel, now where are those men who said, why should Saul rule over us? Look what he just did. Bring them here and we will kill them. Now, context, who were the main group of people that were saying we shouldn't have Saul? They were the people who were faithful to God. Think about that for a second. The nation of Israel, God's people, are now turning against the people who are trying to lead them to God. Because why? They want a king who will angrily lead them into battle. Now, it's really a challenging spot. Israel has a king without king-like qualities. He's not a great leader, but he's a military fighting guy. He's out to make stuff happen, and he's trying to lean on his own wisdom and strength. He's angry, and what you find more and more, he's got all this pressure on him now, because Israel says, sweet, we got a king, we can't be defeated. And under that, he's like, crap. Now I gotta keep rolling in this. I gotta keep pushing, I gotta keep being the military guy. We've been there. We do something successful by accident, and all the people around us now expect us to do it over and over, and we don't want to fail them, but we also don't want them to know the real us, and then we fall into this thing called fear, right? So then we keep trying to put on this face of something that we're not. Meanwhile, on the inside, we're getting torn up into pieces, and that makes us even more angry. Now, there's a great prophet who said this about fear, if you could throw this up. It says, fear leads to anger, and anger leads to the dark side. As silly as that is, it's true. It's true. Now, the dark side is not the force for us, but it's a place as far as human beings where we reject God, lean on our own strength, and then we create a big old mess. And as we continue to follow Saul in these stories, it just keeps going down that road, right? He finds himself in the corner, and now he's like, okay, I got to be this military guy because that's the kind of king I need to be. I don't have character, I don't have God, I'm just going to do this on my own. I'm going to force my hand. And you know, here's the thing. Saul became a great military leader. He kept winning battle after battle after battle after battle, killing thousands of enemies. And this was now his narrative. This was his story. And he became known as a fierce, angry, almost warlord. This sounds like the leader of the nation of God? No, not really. Right? As we see with Jesus in the New Testament, he's the king of the universe. He's the creator. He could have militarily taken over the planet. He doesn't. He goes the other way. Shows grace and love. And yet here's Saul, in contrast to Jesus, conquering, killing, out of his own might, his own strength, his own prowess. Right? He's looking inward, and he wants everyone to see he's this big, strong person, this huge success, person who has it all together. Now, I'm summarizing pieces of Scripture. If you read through his story, you'll see this of him over and over and over. But, on the inside, he knows he's different. He knows he's not that much of a big shot. He's using military might, but he's weak. He knows that he's destined to fail. He knows that he doesn't lean into God. He doesn't even know who he is. Right? It's so interesting how identity failure and anger often go together. It's so interesting. So this is the place he's in. And as he's building this identity, it now becomes threatened, which leads me to point number 2, and we're going to jump into the second story. Our insecurities can either lead us towards Jesus or towards self-destruction. Our insecurities. Because the whole time, as Saul is jumping in as a king, you go, well, he knows what he is. He's successful, he's fighting, he's strong. No, that's the only thing he's got going for him. He doesn't know how to lead the rest of the people. He doesn't know how to have good relationships. He doesn't know how to have a diplomatic conversation with a trade partner. All he knows is like, oh, you want to trade with us? Well, I could. Good human skills, right? We would call him an unemotionally intelligent human being with social, this stays here and here, social impotency, right? He struggles relationally with people. They don't do what he wants, he kills them. That's what Saul does. Now, here's where it is problematic. Enter this little shepherd boy who we just read a bunch of his writings from our Gospel and Psalm series, and in that particular narrative, he comes out and becomes this threat to Saul. Well, why? For the last 3,000 years, we've been talking about this David and Goliath story. Sorry about that. We got a new microphone, apparently that's not fixing it, but we'll keep working on it. David becomes well known, and Saul, most people in the world, when you say Saul, they're like, who's that? When you say David, Goliath? You don't know what that is? All right. With David and Goliath, it's this interesting piece that David shows up and he kills Goliath because they're struggling with the Philistines. I don't know where I should stand here. He's dancing around a little bit. Over here? And no advice, we just kind of shoot at it? All right. So Saul's been militarily effective. Now he has the Philistines and he's not beating them. He's not winning. So in comes David the shepherd boy. He kills Goliath, which Saul couldn't do. And then this happens. When the victorious Israelite army was returning home after David had killed the singular Philistine, one of them, granted he was big, killed one Philistine, women from all the towns of Israel came out to meet King Saul. They sang and danced for joy with tambourines and cymbals. That sounds good. This was their song. Saul has killed thousands, and David his 10,000s. This made Saul very angry. Let me just give you a moment to think of this. Remember, Saul didn't volunteer for the kingship. Saul was standing there when Samuel told the people how bad it would be to have a king, and that a king was an offense to God, and that this guy himself, Saul, is that king. Saul has been trying to prove himself worthy for the position and worthy himself. He's been trying to prove Samuel wrong by being a great military leader and Israel's reputation in the region. And the one thing he was good at was killing Israel's enemies. And now, this wimpy, skinny, not tall, little shepherd boy David is loved more than him. His one piece of identity is now threatened by someone else who doesn't deserve it. To Saul, David is proof that Saul is not great. Anger. So from that time on, this is verse 9, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Saul's been faking it. He's been struggling to be great. He's angry because he's in a place he doesn't belong. He's angry because now his very identity has been threatened. Guys, can we not place our identity in things all the time that we shouldn't? There is one identity that we really need to own, and that is that the creator of the universe created you purposefully, intentionally, made you the way he wanted to, and loves you for every bit of who you are that he created you to be. Your worth, your value, everything you are, was paid for in full by Jesus, by giving up everything for you, for me. All my worth and value, all my identity comes from Jesus alone. Saul couldn't get this. And I'm going to tell you, this is where we are at. I can't do it. I'm like going to go right back in this corner. Sorry, our poor sound guy, he's like, it's something in our system. Well, we might have to bring it in and somebody to look at it. I apologize. What? I could just use a handheld. It's a good idea, babe. Alright. I'm going to kill this one just with this hand. Can you swap? I will tell you, to a degree, it makes Sunday morning a little more exciting because you all jump too, so it's not just me. Alright. The problem is, here's the problem. Saul's identity is in the wrong place. Right? It's in himself. And when it's in himself, what does he do? He looks at other people. And now he's comparing himself to other people, feeling like now he's not good enough because this person looks better. And here's a note. Comparing ourselves to others devalues God's design in us. Okay? Comparing ourselves to others devalues God's design in us, and it only leads to hurt, anger, insecurity, and self-destruction. Now, it's interesting that we see Saul, his identity is an absolute mess. He's not put it in God. Now, Philippians chapter 3, 8-9 says, yes, everything else is worthless when compared with the infinite value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake, I have discarded everything else, counting it all as garbage, so that I could gain Christ and become one with him. I no longer count on my own righteousness through obeying the law, rather I become righteous through faith in Christ. There's so much freedom and joy in knowing who we belong to. If you're here today and you've been in a place where you struggle with your identity, you don't know who you are, who you belong to, you feel like maybe you've had to work to earn his favor, let me tell you something, you don't have to work to earn Jesus' favor. He has already paid in full the price for you and I. Our sin is paid for. The requirement that is put on us is to lean in and accept Jesus as our Lord and Savior. You know, we would say, like, just pray. You've heard this term, pray the prayer. Well, that's kind of weird in some senses, but the reality is it's to verbally and vocally say, Jesus, I don't know everything, I don't have it all figured out, but I believe in you and I believe you paid the price for me. When we vocalize that, we step into the arms of Jesus. It's that simple. It's that simple. And that is the thing Saul couldn't do. And because of that, he falls into a place, we said the third story, he falls into a place of insecurity and jealousy, which is point number 3. When our identity is based on other people, we are left empty and angry. We are left empty and angry. See, now Saul is now dealing with David. In fact, in this story that we see with Saul, he tries to get rid of David multiple times. He sends him out into an army battlefield and tries and hopes that David's going to get killed. What happens? David wins. Every time Saul tries to get David killed, David comes back more victorious, becomes more popular, becomes more liked. Every time that Saul tries to handle things on his own, David ends up winning more and more, and Saul continues to lose, to the point that he's just like so bent on killing David. Now, fortunately for David, we have this momentary reprieve where Saul's son Jonathan, who's good friends with David, has a word with his father, and he says this: the next morning, Jonathan spoke with his father about David, saying many good things about him. He says, the king must not sin against his servant David, not competitor, not equal, his servant David. Jonathan said, he's never done anything to harm you. He has always helped you in any way he could. Have you forgotten about the time he risked his life to kill the Philistines, or to kill the Philistine giant, and how the Lord brought a great victory to all of Israel as a result? You were certainly happy about it then. Past tense, remember, think about this for a second. Why should you murder an innocent man like David? There is no reason for it at all. So Saul listened to Jonathan and vowed, as surely as the Lord lives, David will not be killed. Now, here's another note. In our moments of anger, we are often blinded by the anger and can't see past it. Right? We're just caught up in this emotion. Saul gets to that place, and it takes his son Jonathan to shake him out of it. And here's like the sparkling moment of Saul saying, shoot, I've messed up. Now, unfortunately for him, in the fall down stories, this is it. This is the only time he gets up. And it only lasts like for 3 verses, because as we continue, this is what happens next. But one day, when Saul was sitting at home with a spear in hand, the tormenting spirit from the Lord came upon him again as David played his harp. So David's hanging out in the palace, playing music, right? And as David played his harp, Saul hurled his spear at David. But David dodged out of the way, and leaving the spear stuck in the wall, he fled and escaped in the night. Now, real quick, just to give us a little bit, this tormenting spirit from the Lord, for those of us who are like, oh, did God attack Saul? No, there's a spirit of selfishness, a spirit of like self-indulgence that Saul has. It's a human spirit, it's his own creation, it's who he is. In the original language, it says nothing about any sort of demonic spirit that God attacked Saul with. That's not how God works. Let's make it very clear. It's, as we've heard in our first week of this series, there's times where God pulls back from humanity. He doesn't abandon us ever, but he leaves us to our own decisions. And that's what he's doing with Saul here. In Psalm 81, 11 through 12, we throw this up, this is what this looks like. But no, this is God saying, my people wouldn't listen. Israel did not want me around. So I let them follow their own stubborn desires, living according to their own ideas. So, if you're thinking God is attacking Saul and taking away his will and spiritually investing in him in a nasty way, that's not who God is. That's not what he does. Like it says in Psalms here, he pulls back. He lets Saul jump into his own self-indulgence feelings as he's sitting there, probably watching David for hours, going like, I can't play harp. He's good looking, the ladies love him. He's musically skilled too. He's an athlete because he wins every battle. We've been there, right? You guys were in high school and you weren't the most talented person. I remember that being like, I'm hanging out with my friend, this guy named Matt, who happens to be a pastor today, and it's like, he could play the guitar, he could play the bass, he decided to play the drums, he was an amazing basketball player, and sure enough, at our provincial championships, he's the one who threw the final basket that won them the whole freaking tournament. All the ladies loved him. He sang just beautifully. Well, that's subjective. My wife doesn't think so. But it's like, I just looked at this guy and he's so frustrated with him. Oh, he did another great thing. So as you go like, why would this guy throw a spear at David? He just said he would. And I go, we've been there, people. Maybe it's not in high school. Maybe it's that person at work who just keeps doing amazing things. It just comes naturally, and you have to fight for every inch of ground that you have, and they just walk in and they just, without thinking, they have the right answer. And you're like, I wish I had a spear. We've been there. We're not that different from Saul. We just don't have the kingship and the ability to kill whoever we want to. Right? Thank goodness. So when it comes to Saul, he continues to pursue David. Twice, actually, David captures him and could kill him. Like, they're in this battle back and forth, but David doesn't because he submits to the Lord. Where Saul doesn't. He continues to try to make his own identity of being the ultimate warrior and protector and using his anger to outmatch the enemy, but it finally catches up to him. He's in a battle where the enemy's too great. He doesn't have God and the enemy takes over, kills both his sons, and in a desperate moment, Saul throws himself on the sword and that's it. He just gives up. He lets anger rule his life. He never finds his identity in Jesus. He never believes that God created him with purpose and intention. He only leans on his own strength. He leans on his own wisdom and never leans into the one who designed him. His identity was in the wrong place. He would be the guy today who says, I don't need Jesus. I don't need God. I can do this myself. Right? All the way, right as the car is crashing into the wall, I got this. I can do it myself. The brake's not working. That's okay. I can stop it. The accelerator keeps increasing. You're going to smash into the wall, Saul. No, I'm good. I don't need help. And then he grabs onto the steering wheel and goes, I got this. I'm going to win. His identity's in the wrong place, right up to the point where he kills it. That's Saul. Anger fully takes over. What an exciting story. Aren't you glad to be in the church? But what we can learn from Saul is like all of us, Saul had trials, troubles, and insecurities and expectations of himself and expectations that others were to live up to, but they didn't. There's probably somebody in your life right now that's not living up to your expectations, and you probably are angry at them. There's probably something that you've wanted of your life that's not happening, and it makes you angry and upset. There's probably situations that you've experienced and witnessed in this life where you look at other human beings, and though you maybe not vocalize it, but you're like, man, the world would be better if they weren't in it. We all get there at some point. The difference here is that Jesus is here and has paid the price for us, and even when we have those thoughts, Jesus died for that too. We have the ability to turn back to Him even when we fall. And I'm not saying like the solution today is don't get angry. The solution is Jesus. Because when we are angry and we can't get the train to stop, there is a rope that He gives us and we just grab onto Him. And it's sometimes in those moments like you just got to say His name, Jesus, help me. I'm driving into the wall. I'm angry. I'm furious. This is not going the way I wanted it to go. You are not delivering the way I want you to. And He said, really? Here I am. Grab on. I've got you. It's like, no, Jesus, you are ridiculous. It's like, well, yeah, I hear you say that, and I died for that too. But I love you. I paid the price for you. I care about you. Your anger does not define you. Your mistakes do not define you. Your Creator who paid the price for you, that's who defines you. I want to invite the band up. And let me read this verse again, James 1:2-4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. That perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. See, to identify in Jesus means we disarm the enemy. The enemy can say anything about us. You're not skilled, you're not good, you don't have this together, you're a failure. I'm going to let you down. And yet, we always know where we stand. Because we stand on the foundation of the Creator who paid the ultimate price for you and me. And no matter what has happened in your life, you mean everything to our King Jesus, our Creator, our God. He gave everything up for you and me. So the bottom line, we have fallen when our anger is directed at people. But we stand up when our identity is in Christ alone. Let me pray and then we'll watch this financial piece. Jesus, thank you so much for today. Thank you for guiding us, directing us. Thank you for the story of Saul and just recognizing, like, here's a guy who fell down, fell down, fell down. And yet you were always there reaching out to him. He shows us an example that's the opposite of what you showed us, Lord. That you didn't militarily come to force people into your will, into your arms. That you openly received the mistakes and all. God, there's so much freedom in that. We don't have to force people to you, but that you lovingly reach out to them. And you allow us to be part of the journey. God, for us in here today, who are struggling with anger,